Welcome to Redesigning the Dharma. I'm Adrian Baker, and I'm especially excited to introduce you to today's guest because she's the first person that connected me with ayahuasca and did so through a Buddhist approach, which is really what helped to get me onto this path. So with that said, Spring is a pioneer in bringing mindfulness-based meditation practices to diverse communities. She's a well-known teacher, healer, and visionary leader, formerly based in Oakland, California, and now in Georgia, where she's starting a new project, which we'll discuss. She's the author of A Fierce Heart, Finding Strength, Courage, and Wisdom in Any Moment, and The Spirit of Harriet Tubman, Awakening from the Underground. Spring is one of the founding teachers at the East Bay Meditation Center, an organization that offers Buddhist teachings with attention to social action and multiculturalism. She is a member of the Teachers Council at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, offering teachings on Buddhist philosophy, insight meditation, and loving kindness practices. Spring is also the founder of Lotus Vine Journeys, a one-of-a-kind organization that blends indigenous healing practices with Buddhist wisdom for transformative retreats. In South America, that is based in Costa Rica. She has practiced and studied Buddhist philosophy in both the Theravada and Tibetan schools of Buddhism since 1999. Spring is also a shamanic practitioner and has studied indigenous healing practices since 2008. Spring's workshops, interviews, and writings can be found in mainstream media worldwide. And with that said, I bring you my conversation with Spring Washam.
So I'll just start, first of all, Spring, by thanking you so much for making the time to speak with me and to come on the podcast. It's been so long. And when I started this, you were like towards the top of the list of people I wanted to have on because I did my first ayahuasca retreat with you in Peru in Lotus Vine Journeys. So I'm so happy to reconnect with you.
Wow. Yeah, it's our 10-year anniversary.
Wait, it's Lotus Vine's tenure?
Yes.
Oh,
10
wow.
years. Yeah, we started in 2015.
Wow. Congratulations.
I know. That is, you look back and you think, wow, that's a chunk of time. A decade at this, you know?
Totally. So maybe let's start right there, not presuming that people know what you're doing. Can you talk about what Lotus Vine Journeys is and just explaining the unique approach?
Yeah, I think Lotus Vine Journeys is unique because of its blend of plant medicine, particularly ayahuasca. Now we're working also with Wachuma and psilocybin, but ayahuasca is pretty much for many years that was our core medicine. And it came out of my Buddhist practice and my deep desire to blend ayahuasca with Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy. One doesn't have to be Buddhist to attend a retreat. But it's that framework of liberation that I love. It gives us this map of consciousness that made sense for me. And I remember I spent a year living at the Temple of the Way of Light in 2014 to 2015. And when I left there, I knew right away that I would blend Buddhism because I felt like that for me was a missing ingredient, was the path, how to make sense of all of this, all these visions and all these downloads and like, where is it going and how does one integrate this? And so I saw that there was a gap in that for many people. They didn't know how to make sense of it and go back to their New York City life or London. And then they're like, oh my God, I saw the nature of mind. I'm interconnected, but I'm at a place. Where do I go from here? And so it just came about. But I will say that it's been a 10-year odyssey and a refinement and full of learning and healing, not just myself, everybody who I'm connected with that's involved in that project. And just, it really set me up for, we do these projects and we're like, okay, it's going to be other people, but it became this, even now, just tremendous amount of integration that by blending these, it can provide a path.
Yeah. And that's immediately what attracted me to Lotus Vine as well, was the dharmic connection and integrating that with the plant medicine. You said a bit about what the Dharma really brings to the plant medicine path. And I want to circle back to this as well, talking a lot about the importance of view from a Buddhist standpoint. I'm curious if you could speak to the other angle and talk about what sometimes, like, what does plant medicine bring to Dharma, or what was missing for you and just being on a Dharma path, just meditating without working with entheogens or ayahuasca specifically?
Yeah, that's such a brilliant question because I think all of us, when we get into our spiritual path, I was very young when I started practicing meditation. I think I did my first retreat, intense retreat, when I was in my early 20s. So that was something. And then when you get on the path, you're having this, we would call like a rapid, it's a love affair.
Mm.
It could be a powerful moment. You hear people talk about that when I'm with elders. They're like, when I went to India and I was with Baba. So there was a rapid, what we could call an expansion or an unraveling or an understanding, right? But that's a phase of our journey. And it's like when you fall in love, like we're all in
Mhm.
love with the Dharma, we're on fire and we're practicing. And then what happens if we don't go deeper into the purification, if we don't go
Mhm.
deeper into the real clinging, if we don't really go deeper into the core message of liberation, we can get stuck on a kind of feel good plateau, right? Where we're just practicing to feel more concentrated, to feel better. We've lost that deep hunger for liberation. We start out on that and we give it a good go, but our energy kind of wanes and we settle for maybe the appetizer course versus the whole dinner of what is being presented. And because that level of work is intense when we
Mhm.
really look at what the Dharma is offering. So, what I saw was this plateau. I saw it in myself as I started questioning. You have this idea also that it's a quick, easy path. All right, I'll do a 3-month retreat, check, all liberation at the end. But when you're committing to this, you're committing to lifetimes. You're not committing to a 2-year experiment or a
Mm.
retreat. Like, there was levels, and I started to see in myself that I couldn't get deeper with the practices at that time. Like, I was doing all the meditation, I was doing months and months of practice, I was traveling, I was with Sayadaws and
Mm.
Burmese masters and Thai masters, but it was as if everything was still on the surface.
Mm.
It was still an intellectual understanding. And that intellectual understanding was like an obstacle. Thinking you know, but you don't really know. It's not embodied. It looks embodied at some level, but it's truly, I'm not living from that ultimate freedom. I'm not living every moment from that. And so I started to see other people when I went into teacher training, a formal teacher training at Spirit Rock. I was really shocked by what I was seeing was the lack of insight. Like so much of my years of trainings was sitting with Jack Kornfield, listening to people sharing about their meditations. And I remember being so shocked and so saddened. I was like, everybody's just in the suffering of like, do these teachings work? I'm really
Mm.
confused. I thought this was, but I'm not seeing this liberated mind and energy. I'm just seeing us all in the ocean of samsara. And what I was seeing that in was people would practice 40 years, 50 years that had this resume
Mm.
that one collects of retreats. But I would look at them and they would just be sharing they were still caught in the same pattern that they were 40 years ago. Some
Mm.
more sophisticated version of that. The heart really wasn't opening, or they're chasing the previous experience when it was on fire. They're telling stories from the 70s. And it's like, well, here we are. Where are we now? Where is the energy now? So that was a very big wake up call for me. And then seeing where I felt stuck and how to get down into the deeper levels.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The last thing you said, one way to think about that is it makes sense with some of Ken Wilber's points about development, that
Mm.
actually you can think about maybe from a certain perspective, like the waking up contemplative perspective, the Dharma might have been working in a certain way, but in terms of like psychological development, there were things that weren't tended to or spoken to, perhaps by the practices, the teachings, and there was this other stream of development that wasn't growing as much or working with shadow aspects of the psyche, and that connects and affects with those other streams of development. And that's one thing that I find really interesting about ayahuasca, or this ayahuasca analog that I work with, where it's just incorporating Peganam Harmala with chakruna, which I find it's the same sentient intelligence, just a little bit of a a different feel. It can work through those different streams of development. It can work just on the waking up perspective, working on true nature, but it's also about working on the relative, the psychological level. And what makes it so powerful is that it's possible to really sit on a meditation cushion for a long time and bypass and ignore a lot of those issues. Whereas I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's a lot harder to do that with something like ayahuasca, because you're going to have to face things that you don't want to look at.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really a beautiful point is that shadow work. And also the way that we practice in the West is very
Mm,
comfortable. If we take a beautiful meditation center, it's, oh, just get up, go for a walk, eat a huge meal. We're not really practicing like the ascetics did in another day and time, where that liberation fire forced them into confronting desire and hatred and longing. It's almost like when we get uncomfortable, we just get up and change. Let's go for a hike. Let's go for a meal. Let's go. There was a way of practicing that was very different. And I'm not negating definitely that there was some tremendous value into practice. It feels like a slower path when you're practicing, what do they used to call Spirit Rock, the upper middle way,
the
right?
upper middle path. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus those old yogis in charnel grounds and
Mm,
naked and not eating and practicing hours and battling the demons in their mind. And we don't have that fortitude as much in the
hmm
West, right?
hmm
So in a way, ayahuasca becomes that, opens up that material that one would possibly meet on a mountain alone and doing these intense renunciation retreats where you will sit long enough, you will encounter this material, but it feels like it's very easeful. We have places like Esalen that cater to our spiritual practices, and it's beautiful, but there's a lot of distraction there. And the depth of where we could go, we just don't access it. We give ourselves an out. And so that's okay. It's all about who
Yeah.
we are and where we are.
Yeah. And I would say it's also coming from the yogic tradition. That perspective is dependent on the yogic tradition you're coming from, because I know you're more Theravada. That is deeply ascetic. There are other yogic contemplative traditions where they talked a lot about purification, but for example, Kashmir Shaivism doesn't have that kind of asceticism. The notion of tapas is really important, but asceticism in terms of like the physical practices is not the same in some of those paths that are deliberately like renunciatory versus householder. And that's why I think it can be helpful to learn about these traditions and bring a view to the path so that we can decide what resonates the most for us. But I would say the one common denominator with all of them is the notion of purification is really central, whether it has that deeply ascetic flavor with material conditions or not. The notion of having to purify and work on the samskaras is very true on the psychological, subtle body level, even if it's not intense in terms of the physical conditions or things like that.
Yeah, and I don't think I've worked with renunciation in different ways, and I've had many different ideas about it because someone could actually be doing all that, but still not be getting liberated,
Mm.
right? Someone could be using that as escapism and
hmm
all these other things. So, yeah, we can have that conversation about what is renunciation. But I think what we're renouncing is our attachment to our delusion. That's ultimately whether you put your body in a cave or you're in a palace, if one has that desire to really work with the confused mind in the depths and to take the Dharma on as a, wow, this is liberation. Look what it's saying. Like a
Mm.
lot of people, we don't even know. We just want to develop a little awareness. It's like Dharma light, and that's okay. Dharma light is better than no Dharma.
Much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone doing Dharma light can make a better world. And unless we get into our really deeper layers, we create the world that we see now. There's all of this arising of these energies, and everyone's like, wow, what's going on? It's greed, hatred, and delusion. It's like it's in a tsunami of it. And now we have to work with it in a way that's no escape.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I want to get to some of the interesting things that I've reflected on from doing the Lotus Vine retreat and then reflecting back on it later, being in different settings with people offering it in different ways. And also talking about getting to like what feels aligned for you. Perhaps we can just start there at a big picture question. You've connected two different traditions, you could say, in a way, the Shipibo traditions you were training in, ayahuasca in Peru, and then also the Dharma traditions. I'm curious what sort of naturally feels aligned to you, but also what doesn't necessarily go together so easily about those two sometime? Where is there tension as well?
So I spent so many years, as you mentioned, with Shipibo healers, and I
Mm,
studied with them, and I found so much resonance there, especially in the early days. I was going to Peru in 2007.
mm,
I was on that early flight of people going down to Iquitos and then from Iquitos out into all these different centers and looking and studying. And I think one of the issues that I have encountered, the tension, I guess you could
yeah.
say, is around ethics. And I think that I went into believing that all these great beings who work with plants have the same ethical framework of non-harming, non-stealing around sexuality. And I think for me, as I've moved a little bit, it's almost like the Shipibos are in my bones, but there's a new expression of it. Like I moved out of Peru and then I went to Costa Rica. And now I'm doing a lot of things here in the North. Now that laws are changing and decriminalization's happening and
Sorry to clarify, you don't mean the north of Costa Rica, you mean like
I
North
mean,
America?
Northern America, the
Yeah,
North,
gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah.
like US, I've
Yeah.
come back. So I never thought I would ever be out of South America. I just
Mm,
never could even fathom that. But with this merge of information and decriminalization, counties and states, and this movement to see plant medicine as this agent of healing trauma, that the true depths of it is being studied, in the psychedelic, where it's MDMA or all of that. But that gets me back to this point of where I separated a bit from the Shipibo, not in my spirit, but it was around ethics
mm.
and harm. I had to fire many different maestros. And I finally just decided when I left Costa Rica after fired my final one, I was like, wow, I just have a different ethical standard.
Hmm.
This is not just about the ceremony. So even those people were not integrated. They could
Mm.
be in the ceremony. It's like a beautiful doctor that you go to, right? And you need an eye surgery and you go to call the best eye surgeon in the whole world. And he does an amazing eye surgery on you and you can see and you're clear. But then he goes home and he drinks and he hits his kids and he cheats on his taxes and he's mean to everyone, but he has that gift,
Mm.
right? He can
Mhm.
give you the best. That was the rub. It's like those Buddhist precepts of non harming began to weigh on me when I would see people acting in ways that they weren't attuned to that. They hadn't taken that precept. And also the compartmentalization. It's not just how we are in the ceremony or we're living in the retreat. It's what are we doing when the moment we leave and how that
Mhm.
impacts everything else. And so that began to create a tremendous amount of tension. How the leaders in which I was merging with and leading these Lotus Vine retreats with, I started to feel the effects of the ethics not being aligned with non harming and being unconscious and creating things and actually real harm. And so that has always been a big issue for me. So that's why I'm in a new birth right now of my work. And then it's more about trusting myself, trusting the Dharma to guide us more now versus an external person, right? It's
Yes.
us coming back to ourselves. The light is in us. We're kind of codependent or something on these other people. But no, the light is in us now. The medicine in is us. The path is within us. Now let us embody it. So I've come full circle on a lot of ways in which I'm working with.
Wow. That's super interesting because in a lot of ways, what I wanted to talk to you about this point, because that's something for me that just naturally, like I loved a lot of aspects of the traditional setting in terms of just, I had so much respect for the medicine. I wanted to work with it and learning about it. But there were certain things that didn't resonate naturally with me. And I think obviously different things work for different people and that's okay. But for me, psychedelics have always been about a direct connection with whatever you want to call it, the divine source, true nature. And it just intuitively felt for me like it was not something that needed to be mediated or guided by
Mhm.
someone else. And there was that it's someone else's energy coming in here and directing, like There's an intelligence, and this is how I feel like working with ayahuasca, that it's this unbelievable sentient intelligence that can't be improved upon by another person. And so it just felt very strange to have that. But then when I connected with a friend later, who became a friend, but he's a facilitator, and I said, I'm interested. I had a good experience, but here are my reservations. And there were a number of issues that I had. And one of them was, he said, he trained in the traditional way with Shipibo, but he said, in my experience, it's really about a direct connection with the medicine. It's not about having someone guide it for you. And that the real teaching is about opening into complete non-resistance and not feeling like you need someone else to like call in a spirit, or when it's difficult to like move it along. All of that, in a sense, is kind of a form of resistance. And it's really about completely opening to whatever is arising and surrendering to it. And so now you might not agree with perhaps that latter take, or I'd be curious to hear it, but it's interesting how you, sounds like in your own way, perhaps for your own reasons, you've moved to this place of more the direct connection and not the
Yeah.
mediation. And actually one thing that, sorry to add, he did say was that part of the issue with the shamanic context is precisely what you said, is you are, when you have that person in that central role, they're bringing their karma into the space. And so, you know, it just puts a very high burden on that for that person to really have their act together in terms of cleaning things up, being aware of a lot of shadow stuff and all of that. And by not having that, by having the facilitator create the space, it does remove that issue, or at least minimizes it a lot.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting conversation about that, the role of the maestro and maestra, and what are the power dynamics, because they're given supreme power. They're deposited as the ones who hold the knowledge and who are the healers. So I think for a long time, we needed that paradigm.
Mm.
This was ayahuasca was so powerful and so unknown, and we were entering into a stream that we didn't have ground in yet. And so as I meet with people who are older, have gone through all of the years of training and lived with all the, and now they're in different parts of the world, we've all kind of woken up to that same concept. Is it wasn't that it wasn't useful, but we're seeing where the rub is now, where we don't need a third person. And there is a beautiful, important, and I don't want to de-emphasize for listeners, because the dangerous side is that people start taking things in their own hands and get hurt. There's a role of a guide, right? And a
Absolutely.
role of a beautiful
Yeah.
space held with intentionality, with love, with
Yeah.
care. That is the real place. Someone just opens that up, a group of people, or
Mm.
so maybe we call them space holders, but we don't have this centralized.
Or facilitator versus a
Yeah.
shaman, but there's still
There's
someone creating a sense of
there's
safety and holding the space. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's very important to not disregard, because then I
definitely.
see some people getting in trouble off on their own, doing all these things, and then calling and being like, I was stuck and terrified and
Yeah.
re-trauma. It's like, so it's like holding that balance. But I think the key is that the medicine is in you, the connection is direct. And
Hmm.
how do we create spaces that foster that direct connection, where there's nobody in that seat of ultimate power, where they're sort of, it's a lot of danger in that. And we've seen where that has gotten people into a lot of trouble, not only traveling and being in situations where there was somebody acting as a shaman, or, there's a lot of fakes. So that's the danger. It's for every 10, there might be one real one. The
Mm.
other 9 are acting, in some way. It's a job.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle, but there's not that deep, compassionate heart invested in their own spiritual growth. So it feels like a new time. It
Mm.
feels like we are the medicine. And for many of us who trained in that, there's so many gifts that I received there, but also so many things that I now want to do differently. And we're in a new place and a new time and in a different culture. And I think that it's less power down and more power around. Everybody holds their own seat of power. And even when someone's taking the medicine and they are in a very vulnerable position, to remind them how powerful they are, that the light is in them. They don't have to keep looking out to displace their liberation somewhere else. Or even if they're getting help, it's still them.
Yeah.
They're doing the work. They're in relationship. There's just a way to hold even real healing that happens where I'm helping someone and there is a shift in the energy, but it's them doing it. It's
Hmm.
compassion doing it. There's no one behind it.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Which,
I
if
like
you have the
that.
view, if
Yeah.
you have a non-dual, Buddhist view,
Yes. And
then you
Maestro
have
not most of
what
them. They have a very solid sense of self.
there's
Yeah.
a very dualistic view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that right there is, I think, a key part of what I feel is a difference in terms of what I'm trying to promote on this platform and the way I approach the medicine and the way I learned it from my friend who facilitates versus the
Mhm.
traditional approach. It's that non-dual versus dualistic view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a very refined
Mm,
perspective,
mm,
right? Most people who are, say, where there's a veteran who has huge amounts of trauma, they might benefit a lot from working in a Shipibo ceremony. But there is a point where, as we evolve, we then start to need something different, right?
yeah.
Where we're on that level where our sankharas are about uprooting dualistic view.
Yes.
That is, so this doesn't work anymore when we're refining that level of insight and trying to rest in a deeper truth that becomes an obstacle. The
Yeah. I
Mhm.
think people can come to it naturally, and sometimes that's one way to learn. Learning's a process of discovery, and you don't tell people as much up front, and it's that power of discovery that's really potent. But I'm also thinking the value of having a map, which you alluded to at the beginning of the conversation. And from a Vajrayana perspective, for example, right? It's taking fruition of the path. They give you that non-dual view up front. And just even telling someone, even the veteran, someone who's never studied, practiced Dharma, just giving the metaphor of the mirror of awareness. Everything that's happening is a reflection in the mirror of the awareness. This scary demon or whatever it is out there, it's not an actual, not reifying it. We don't need to use the word reifying with them, but like it is a manifestation of mind. It's an appearance in the mirror, and you can turn towards it. You can check in if there's resistance or if you're opening to it. But even just giving people that mirror of awareness, or there's different metaphors, mind is like the sky metaphor, even if it's just an intellectual understanding and they don't get that direct recognition for a very long time, I find can really shift people a lot.
Yeah, it's like we're planting the really deep seeds of truth in them. And
Yeah.
those seeds, rather they're unconsciously ruminating on it or it's exactly. And that's where I am now. I'm
Mm,
working where I've come with the medicine is
mm.
exactly that.
Well, say
And
more about that. Yeah.
yeah, well, I recently, on the 10-year anniversary, I think I'm gonna retire, right?
Mm,
Because somehow after 14 years and leading hundreds of ceremonies, and I don't even know how many retreats, probably over 100 of our 14-day all
mm,
out, I realized as I was thinking about letting it go, that's the perfect metaphor, right? You're
mm.
like, well, I'll retire. And then I was like, but I don't want to retire because all over the world, people send me these messages and they're like, and I have great conversations like this. And I thought, no,
Mm,
there's a role for this. I get invited to MAPS and speak about it and clergy. And I thought this is a unique thing because we were one of the early pioneers of being a Buddhist based
mm,
blending Buddhism and shamanism. And so I thought I'll just strip it down to its essence. And I thought about green Tara and I said, what if green Tara is our guide now? The enlightened feminine, the enlightenment, the awakened Buddha. And that's the real guide. It was almost like the 10 years I was like stripping it all. It was like this journey going all over and back again. I thought, what if awakened consciousness is the guide? And I guess I was maybe scared of that people wouldn't get it or they needed these external
mm,
pieces to feel safe. But I just trusted. So I let all of that go. And I put green Tara. I redid our whole website, and now it's Ode to Tara, the awakened
mm,
Buddha in a feminine form.
mm,
And what if I allowed Tara to be the maestra? And I evoked Tara, and we did Tara practice, and we invoked compassion as the greatest guide. And that's my new birth, letting go. And of course, there's myself, and some people refer to me as a maestra or curandera or anything. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's just compassion that sings and moves. And I have this team of other Dharma devotional people, really, truly Dharma folks, not just a team that's half and half, which causes a little bit of a
Yeah.
misses the mark on some level.
Misalignment, I can
Yeah,
imagine.
there's like
Yeah.
this constant I have to like work to align versus we are holding together a kind of devotional faith and frequency of refuge.
Yeah.
So that became the new birth. That's what I'm doing now.
Very interesting. It's so fascinating how
Yes, full circle.
and that's what you're describing is, I'm going to ask, I want to hear more about what the actual ceremony space looks like, but that just totally resonates with my own way that I approach the medicine. It's really through a Dzogchen view and path, and it's invoking whatever deity resonates most. Sometimes it's coming from Vajrayana, sometimes it's the Hindu tantric traditions. We
Yes,
can pick those archetypes that resonate most with us, but it's important, I think, to honor the traditions and the cultures where it came from, but also give it permission to adapt. And this is why I love the Dharma as a great metaphor, because the Dharma had to adapt whatever it went. Like Tibetan Buddhism is quite different from Buddhism in Sri Lanka, and it's quite
right.
different from Zen because
Yes,
it needs to meet people where they are. And Buddhism's really great about that. It's not dogmatic, it can adapt. The same thing I think is true for this medicine and for ayahuasca or Soma. And one thing that I hear about people, for example, like from Thailand, there are people who connected with my friend who's a facilitator, but then they said they couldn't really relate to it through that kind of more shamanic way. But when it was in there was a safe space, the medicine, I've noticed this a lot with Thais, they naturally get lots of Buddhist archetypes
yes,
coming
yes.
through, or someone who's Muslim saying, I'd like to work with it, or a Christian, but there's certain things about that container that might violate some of my own religious principles or practice. People just need to be able to make sense of it through their own framework. And we can give them a secular view, like the mirror of awareness, but there needs to be some permission for people to play with it and make sense of it in their own meaning making specific way.
Absolutely. I was inspired to create Lotus Vine Journeys from Santo Daime, the church that started in Brazil's worldwide, but they're the Christian ayahuasca church.
Mm.
And I remember feeling they can do a Christian. They do
Yeah.
whole church services, right? Whole they have a Jesus shrine and they have Mary and they sing all their biblical songs and hymns. It's in Portuguese.
Mm.
However, it's a worldwide movement and they're legal in the US too. They fought the government and they won their religious freedoms, rights, and all of that. But they inspired me actually to create a Buddhist based framework because it was so helpful. And when people would go there to Santo Daime, they would say, I liked it, but I didn't really relate to the archetypes that they were worshiping, which was a lot around Jesus. They actually think ayahuasca is the blood of Christ. So as
Right.
they're taking it, they're literally in
It's a
that view.
sacrament. Yeah.
It's a sacrament, and I love that for people who have the Christian faith and they go deep with it and they feel connected in a totally different way. And so I think you're right as these communities evolve, and it's hard, right? Because we want to always honor where things come from. There was
Yeah.
this tremendous gift given and that was carried through these people who are making the medicine. Even right now, the medicine makers
Mm.
are most of them are in Pucallpa, right? Or are harvesting and putting medicine not only all over Peru, but Brazil and people there. So there's a deep sense of having one foot in the honor and then another foot in the adaptation and the evolution of liberation, which different things are needed at different times to break through. And what might work for me 10 years ago no longer feels liberatory. It did at the beginning.
Mm.
It really, I needed it. It was important. And now it's just something different as we're in a new age. So I guess there's that tension between the old and the new, the ancestors, the
Yeah.
medicine carriers.
Yeah.
And I think where people get averse to this adaptation is when they feel that there's not a recognition of the labor, the work, the
Yeah.
time, where this medicine comes from and how it was worked with. So I think there just always has to be that going back in order to honor, to understand, to know. And then as we adapt, to just not lose sight of the good things that were there
Mm.
and then adapting it to this moment in time right now in 2025 and allowing it to grow, allowing ayahuasca to flourish. Because there also can be that keeping her in a box of tradition and rules, and it's also binding that energy. So I noticed for me, I tread that tension of those two, wanting to always be honoring, because that's where I had my deepest healing in the
Yeah.
jungle. And then knowing, okay, here we are. So it's that understanding of both of those have to be a part of this. So even now, I don't want to make it sound like I'm denouncing. It's just growing out of
It's
some.
evolving. Yeah.
It's evolving, and
Yeah.
the medicine wants to evolve. The medicine's consciousness. She's not
Medicine.
beholden to one group of people. She's beholden to the collective awakening.
Yes.
And there's the honoring of those who labored to actually produce it and to
Yeah.
understand it. So I just noticed I have those questions around all of those are still alive in me as I express this new vision and move into it of how to carry that lineage and then move it forward to meet that moment.
Yeah. It's something that you just said there about honoring it, like the specific group of people who nurtured it, but that it doesn't belong to this supreme intelligence, doesn't belong to a particular
No.
group. And it reminds me a lot of a quote from Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, where he talks about Dzogchen. And he was very open-minded and innovative in a lot of ways. And he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but said something along the lines of, Dzogchen happened to be discovered within Tibet by Tibetan people. I'm sure there's some debate perhaps with other Himalayan groups about that or Bon people. So I'm not weighing in on that. But it happened to be discovered in a particular area by a particular group of people. But Dzogchen doesn't belong to the Tibetan people or to a particular. It's
Whoa.
just the nature of mind. It just happened to be discovered there. It's like gravity was discovered in a particular area of the world, but it doesn't belong to that group of people. It's something universal.
Yeah. And I really understand that because I remember talking to Jack and he used to tell me Ajahn Chah was teaching Dzogchen.
Right.
Yes. He
Well,
said that all the time. I learned
well,
Dzogchen from Ajahn Chah in the jungle.
Sokni Rinpoche was doing those retreats for a little bit with Ajahn Amaro on the
Yeah.
connection between Thai forest tradition and Dzogchen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I told me that all the time. So the wisdom doesn't belong to anyone,
Yeah.
yet there's a kind of honoring those who harnessed it and shared it.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes what gets lost in the West. They take without honoring.
Yeah.
And that becomes the big sticking point that feels unbalanced with it. We know that Tibetans didn't just discover Dzogchen. It's the nature of mind. It's like,
Yeah.
however, when we go,
Yeah.
oh, these great bastards who sat in caves 20 years and then escaped across the border to share it. There's something also about giving that respect and devotion and honor,
Mm.
thanking those who labored. And for me, that's the only tension I see here with bringing things is there's just such that consumption, appropriation with no acknowledgement that happens that it just sometimes gets tied up in people's minds and we can get tied up in the culture war around it when there's not the love and the honoring and so for me, that has to be there with Shipibos is I always honor the depths of their own medicine and the wisdom and the Icaros and the power in that clear stream that was there and still is in its depth, right? There's that clear nature of mind, peace that runs through that tradition. But yet knowing that there's limitations too on everything. So I just like to I'm grappling with that as I express this new way without having the focus be on the indigenous maestro shaman. And it's more of this other blend
Yeah.
conversation that comes up.
I bet it does. Can you talk a little bit more about the specifics of what this blend looks like that you're offering?
It's just really the same in so many ways, like the same type of schedule where we're doing less ceremonies. Now, I think I remember in the old days, you came to one of my early ones. I think we
Yeah.
were still doing 7 ceremonies or some huge.
Yeah, 8. It was 2 on, 1 off.
Oh my
And
God.
that was really rough. For me, I need a night off now after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
2 in a row is
Well,
tough.
that also was influenced by my hardcore era where I was coming out of the jungle for a year. So I'd lived on the medicine for a year straight,
Mm.
doing dieta nonstop, nonstop. I didn't understand what it meant to integrate and slow down. There was only one gear, and
Yeah.
that's time. And that has been such a huge evolution of, wow, people are fainting outside and crying before the
Yeah.
ceremony. I'd be like, come on, do you want to heal or not? It's not understanding that healing is happening. So we've stopped that after a couple of years. I think the last 14-day I did, we only had 4 ceremonies. We did a 5th one was like a
Right. I saw that. There was also, I can now compare it later, but there was a lot of chakruna in that brew. It was like
oh
really
yeah,
high levels.
incredible
Yeah.
DMT.
Yeah.
So we were doing all the things that were blasting off.
Yeah.
But I don't know all the time if it was grounded. That was the model that I picked up from my year of diet. And not only that year, I had been doing retreats for, I don't know, 7 years before that. That was the
Mm.
program of how you worked with it. There was no innovation. It was like, that's what you were doing.
Mhm.
So now as we step back and we're understanding trauma and of course all these things. So yeah, it's the same thing. I work with a group of basically musicians and healers. And we just set a beautiful stage and we go in and we evoke Tara and we have the Dharma talks and we're healing our bodies. And yeah, I think we're playing all the same medicine music and Icaros, but it's just framed completely different.
Mm.
Like Freya does, you are a Buddha. Let's
Nice.
try to remember. Okay. This is a remembrance ceremony. And it
Yeah.
might hurt and you might purge and you might cry. And it's just, I'm just framing it all different as my own evolution of understanding and what appeals to me. And I asked
Yeah.
Tara, the awakened mind, to be the guide, to be the real
Mm.
maestro, lead this ceremony. And it's just so beautiful and so whole. It's so nurturing.
It
Yeah.
sounds like you're
Love.
I'm hearing that you're really integrating the Buddhism throughout all of it now, because before when I was there, it was woven together beautifully, but it was really like the Dharma was present. There was a Dharma talk for the integration the night off, and then there'd be a Dharma talk and some meditation before the ceremony. But then once we were in the ceremony space, the Buddhist symbols and language, that didn't enter the space so much. It was really okay, then it's the traditional Shipibo. And what I'm hearing here is it's really sort of the Buddhist traditions really infusing every aspect, including the ceremonial
Absolutely.
space. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because that's what I need. And that's
Yeah.
what many of us need. And I think you were at those early retreats where I wasn't even co-leading as much. So that began to
Mm.
be different too as I began to take over more and more parts of the ceremony and guide. And so there
Yeah.
was that all I didn't know how to integrate these two back then. I was experimenting with what I thought. And also when you're doing 7 ceremonies, everyone's tired. There's no time
Oh,
for
yeah.
Dharma.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of time to
It was
sit.
actually 8 now that I'm remembering. It was
Oh
8,
God.
2
You were
on, 1
there the
off.
first 2 years. And
Yeah.
I mean,
2017.
yeah, so we started in 15, and I
Yeah.
think you were the last year where I had 8. I was like, "Okay, we're gonna cut this down." I remember going to 6 was, like, revolutionary, and it was still and then when we went to 5, people complained initially until they did it, and they were like, "Thank God we only had 5." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Guys, the medicine's also amplifying here.
Yes.
It's getting stronger. It's getting more powerful. One ceremony could do what 3 used to do, you know? So
Mhm.
so yeah, so my ceremonies now is completely interwoven. We have times of mindfulness, mantra, evoking the deities, whether it's Tara or Gautama or Maitreya. It's just coming back to taking refuge. So it's naturally infused more. I think it's naturally my own embodiment, and every guide is different, right? What they're embodying and how they're holding comes through their own heart. And that deep commitment to bodhicitta and the bodhisattva path for me is everything in how I want to lead. If I couldn't lead from that place, I was going to retire. I was like, it's
Mhm.
this or nothing now. This is the only context that I want to work with this particular organization, which is Lotus Vine Journeys. I'm also starting a whole nother program here in Georgia, but that's still rooted in the same ideas. But this Lotus Vine has always been just a grand experiment.
Yeah.
It continues to
Is
evolve.
in
And I'm
life, just a
glad.
grand experiment. Yeah,
Yes, and I
completely.
love that it's evolving, and I hope that I look back in 2 years and go, "Wow, we're doing this now? We're doing Dzogchen meditation in the ceremony? Beautiful."
Are
Or
you
we're
doing Dzogchen meditation in the ceremony?
we're trying to point people in that direction
Yeah.
by the end.
Amazing.
Yeah. And we're doing, and now I'm also use Chuma, the San Pedro,
Yeah.
as my third ceremony because I think it brings so much balance and harmony and
Mm,
embodiment and heart. And it's an interesting time to reflect. And I have been over this journey of many years on how to work with plants. And not only that, also psilocybin has become very important to me now
hmm.
and how I can help people through psilocybin. So my journey with the medicine will just continue to evolve as I also host just psilocybin retreats, which actually can be as powerful and
Sure.
illuminating. And so we're just like opening up everything at this stage.
Very cool. I love
Yeah.
that. I'd love to get your perspective on this. I think there's so much talk now about psychedelic integration for good reason, but it's interesting how I think there's very little emphasis on like psychedelic preparation a lot of times. Like that hasn't become a buzzword to the extent that psychedelic integration has. And that's one thing I notice a lot. It's like people have this big experience and then they're like, oh, I need help integrating it. I found your channel or this or that. Comparatively fewer people who I meet, especially from the West, who are like, oh, I'm really intrigued by it, but actually I want to take my time and develop a meditation practice. And that's part of why I'm creating this channel is to emphasize the importance of preparation as well as integration. So I'm curious what you all are doing in terms of helping to prepare people. I imagine you also identify a type of crowd who's more than average, perhaps more prepared, has a meditation practice, things like that. But I'd just be curious what the way you approach that psychedelic
Yeah.
preparation.
I would agree with you that the preparation is also something I appreciate about the indigenous people, though. They used to talk a
Yeah.
lot about preparation,
Yeah.
right? Diet, mental, all the things there. So I think some way I've really adopted that lately. For me, we have all these twice a month. I have info sessions, teaching sessions for preparation that anybody can come to. They're open. If you're interested in coming to a retreat, you can hear about that retreat in general. But what I'm teaching is how to prepare the mind, the body, the spirit, our intentions, our motivation, and doing that deep work of compassion. That's mostly how I train people is to get into their heart because it is going to be the heart that holds it. It's going to be this compassionate awareness, loving awareness that holds it. And so that kind of preparation is, yeah, it's really important. And it's not something that people realize because when you hear about the benefits, everyone just runs and give it to me now. So
Yeah.
we start catching up. But I do think, as I talk to friends of mine who are in this field, and from one of my good friends is East Forest Krishna,
Oh,
who
very cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
he recently released this music from mushrooms documentary, and I'm a lot in the documentary. And so we had a premiere here in Atlanta, Georgia, and this conversation about preparation, being prepared, setting the set and setting, this information is going to have to be really widely distributed. And what I like about Krishna or Isis is he's preparing all this music for those who are going to take the medicine alone or outside. He's like,
Mm.
I see this as a huge calling because they're going to need a guide. And through
Yeah.
this 5-hour journey album, I'm gonna give it all up and down, and if they could just lock on to that. So, we do need to teach people preparation because as we enter into this period where systems are collapsing,
Mm.
where the health systems and psychiatric systems, mental health, you will have a huge group of people consuming psychedelics and not always knowing how to do this. And so I'm hoping that many people come out of the closet from therapists and guides, and we start making music and recording on how to prepare and having these conversations because I think the world, all the people who are losing their jobs in the US, I'm like, get into psychedelic therapy. This is the new paradigm.
Mm.
Right. This is the new world. This will be I believe for the next few years will be a massive shifting, but people do need to understand the wisdom and understand the power of these plants. And that should be emphasized in a preparation guide. And
Yes.
so that's a lot about what I talked about with people and medication and healthcare and what's happening here and what's not to be combined. Still, it's a lot of information. But I think as we move this out of the hidden realm of healthcare and into the forefront, hopefully there'll be a tremendous amount of information coming online from people like myself or you or others, hundreds and thousands of others that are guiding this work to be more explicit in preparation and then during self-guided. This is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. And what do you do when you're alone and you just don't even know, what music to listen to, what can help you? And so I also plan on making a whole bunch of content around this preparation. I'm not sure the vessel to deliver it, whether it's on YouTube or on
Mhm.
Spotify I want to make it 100% accessible. There needs to be a lot of thought to those who are going to do this in massive amounts,
Yeah.
like large populations of people when this research starts coming in, and could even be a massive legalization, just the door thrown open on it very quickly. We don't know with the government here in the US where things are landing, but it's a
Yeah.
deregulation time. So this could just, the floodgates could just get pushed open. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I
Mhm.
think this is like a Hail Mary pass.
Yeah.
This is just something I'm happier talking about and thinking about, because I do believe if we could make this as part of the healing of the heart and the mind, and there's a lot happening. I'm tracking new people online who are doctors and therapists that are putting out really good guidelines.
Excellent. Yeah, and also just having open source, like just best
Open source,
practices,
everything.
because
Yeah,
not so applicable for ayahuasca for maybe practical reasons and things like that, but psilocybin stuff like that. I think there are safer ways to do that in a group of people if it's done
yeah,
responsibly. You have a sober sitter, or that sober
yeah,
sitter maybe has some
yeah,
experience. You're following best practices. There are ways to mitigate a lot of those things, and that information just needs to get out there. Also, knowing people are just gonna do it
yeah.
anyways.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, always, because
Yeah.
that's just part of what people can do. They may not be able to access a sitter
Yeah.
or guide, but they have their friends and they're out in the woods, and be it good or bad, but we can keep trying to elevate the conversations and to keep trying to provide the support. And as I meet people and people write to me all the time, having had a difficult experience, thank good ayahuasca is less available. There is a kind
Yeah.
of built-in guardrails there. It's very hard to get ayahuasca anywhere. And if you do order it online somewhere, the quality and you just don't really know.
It's just harder to make. Even if you were doing pure DMT, which is not the same as ayahuasca, it just takes a lot more effort in like
Yeah.
engineering skills and botany, whatever to make it. So it's not like you can't just get the bag
Yeah.
of psilocybin mushrooms, so that it has these higher barriers to entry.
Which I think is important. The earth itself is guarding it in a certain
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the recipes are very intricate. Ayahuasca works when she wants to work, and how the rest, there's a lot of bad batches out there. I've met many people who have worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, you
Oh,
know?
totally. After drinking, now I'm biased because the more, now that I've drunk a lot with my friend who I really trust him and how he makes it, people are like, oh, you should come join our circle. I was like, I really appreciate the invitation, but I'm like, I'm not drinking someone else's. I want to know what's
Yeah,
in it.
yeah, exactly. And, it's just, yeah, I'm glad that there are guardrails around that. Also, there's more contraindicated issues with that. That's why I love
Definitely.
moving into more psilocybin and wachuma,
Yeah.
which I think is an unsung hero of the plant world. Some
Yeah.
hero. So learning how to work with those and able to grow those here in the US, that's also something.
I'd love to ask you something on that note about the contraindication. I share what I imagined your view, which is so much of the benefits, really half of the benefits, really are coming from the vine or Peganam Harmala. They're coming from the beta carboline, so much of the healing regenerative properties. And so for me, I'm really someone who wants to take the full plant medicine and not vape DMT. But for someone who has contraindications with the MAOI aspect, in your experience, what has been the value, or what is the value in terms of healing or other properties for people who are just doing pure DMT? from what you've observed?
Yeah, I don't think DMT, just a smokable experience, is a full experience. It's nothing
Mm.
like an 8 hour
Right.
journey with ayahuasca where you are unveiling layers and purging out entities or working on your family tree or clearing your DNA. I think it has
Yeah.
potential. It's a doorway, but for me, that's not a full one. For me,
Mm.
the ayahuasca full journey with the vine, because you're with a doctor. People have to understand ayahuasca is a doctor. There are the DMT spirits for sure. You interact with them. But ayahuasca is a chief of staff, ultimate
Yeah.
soul doctor. So if you need to go again, that DMT could actually be like the McLight meditation we were talking about doing.
Yeah.
Some people could adopt that and think they're
Mm.
doing that soul level clearing, and it's not
Mm.
really.
Yeah.
I've been talking to him many times. I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is incredible and can open gates and beautiful things." But again, those deeper sankharas, they're another level to get to. They're another level to grapple with. They require an aware presence that is more than just surface.
Yeah. That's removing the karmic notch from the subtle body
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
what the beta carbolines
Yeah, we have to
are essential
go
for.
into the underworld. We have to
Yeah.
pull out, otherwise it rules us.
Mm.
And you only have to look around on the planet right now to understand when greed, hatred, and delusion is not cleared. The destruction, the delusion, and the power that those who are gripped in that can exert on humanity. And
Yeah.
so for me, that is such a profound, if anything, it's an inspiration to go deeper into uplifting, to looking at the shadow and to working with it. However, and I'm going to tell you another thing. I
Mm.
have a really good friend of mine who is a scientist at this incredible, it's like a retreat center in Madison, Wisconsin called Usona. And he helped extract the molecule out of the mushroom
Okay.
so that they could put it into tablets and that they could
Mm.
run it through the FDA as a treatment for resistant depression. And him and I talk all the time. He's brilliant. He's come visiting me in Georgia and we talk about all this. And he always laughs when I talk about these different molecules. He goes, at the end of the day, they're the same. Because I always go, no, this ayahuasca. And I go, oh, this. And so I do think, in a way, all these plants, there is a similar. So I think psilocybin can mimic ayahuasca in high dosages.
Well, the
If
molecular
you feel
structure is very similar, right? People
right.
talk about that of DMT and psilocybin.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a similarity. And I think at the end of the day, also the plant world has become non-dual too. It's just the
Yeah.
higher mind talking to the confused mind.
Yeah.
That's the Buddha nature. And so I've gotten where I used to be really specific. I can go, okay, I've relooked at psilocybin and wachuma in different ways. So I was very preferential to ayahuasca, believing that Aya is the most powerful one. And I do believe she is, but due to the lack of resource of that medicine here in
Mm.
the West, we just don't have it. Last year, I don't know how much vine they lost. It was so much in all those fires, those never ending fires. And so that medicine, I don't know how it will exist unless it's planted in massive quantities. But psilocybin,
But you're giving me an incredible segue there, which I have to take,
yes,
which is that's part of the reason my friend and I are very excited about Peganam Harmala, which has
yeah,
harmine and harmaline, which are the same key beta carbolines for people who don't know in the ayahuasca vine. And so Peganam Harmala could grow in the climate in the Southwest or in many parts of the US.
wow,
Yes. So it's indigenous to and grows all over Spain, the Middle East. You could grow it. It was big India, Kashmir, and you can grow it in parts of the US. And I'm telling you, when you take it, I don't want to say it's the same. It's a different plant and it feels different. I think with the vine, it feels the way it grows in nature. It really takes over things. It goes into every corner of your body and pulls things out. It's more purgative that way,
yeah,
but it is the same intelligence. And I find the benefit also of Harmala is I think after I went through my initial ayahuasca ceremonies, as someone who wanted to work with it in an ongoing way, it's easier to work with in an ongoing way because it's just a bit lighter on the body, at least for me. but it does that same function of it's providing the relaxation, it's opening the channels in the subtle body, it's helping to remove those karmic knots when it's in union with chakruna or
Wow.
another DMT source. And it's just so, my friend who grows the vine says he said that's something I can feel growing the vine versus Peganam Harmala. Peganam Harmala is just so much more sustainable. So I
Yeah.
really think this could be,
The
you know,
gateway.
yeah, a way to solve this issue around sustainability and also growing it locally within the US.
We have to have definitely another conversation because
We
this is,
do.
yeah, I've been hearing about these blends and stuff, but I've never met anyone who's really worked with what you're describing in this new way. But yeah, sustainability. These medicines have to become easier, sustainable to grow.
Mm,
And I do believe the ability to share them wider and wider. I think these medicines I see as a huge shift in consciousness over the next 3 years. There's a kind of period we have here. And I do believe that these are going to play a major role in this shifting consciousness and great turning.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And
The
I would also,
easier access, the better on some level.
yeah, and we could also grow excellent DMT sources in parts of the US, right? Those same acacia that are very popular in Australia. You could grow the cordyai, the fevifilo, and the acuminata in certain parts of the US as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's what my friend calls the soma, which is it's the mix of that acacia growing DMT with the Peganam Harmala. And that's part of the hypothesis and why some people, there's a scholar at SOAS in London who speculates, just a hypothesis, but that this was the soma from the Rig Veda was a combination of the
Mm.
Peganam Harmala and DMT sources.
We always
Yeah.
wonder what was the ingredient?
Yeah. Whether it was or not, either way, I find that it mirrors that experience that is described in Soma. And that's what's compelling about because it's not only the entheogenic, but it has that Soma was the elixir of immortality. It was regenerative. And the beta
Mhm.
carbolines bring that regenerative property to the experience. I noticed there's a lot of language in ayahuasca, and I felt this about it reprogrammed me, it deprogrammed me, all these
Right.
kind of things. That's coming from the beta carbolines. Again, in union, it's about the synergy with the sentient intelligence in DMT, but the beta carbolines are critical to that. And actually, some people who combine psilocybin with these beta carbolines say it's very similar to ayahuasca if you take them together.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
recently did a high dose of psilocybin for the first time, a really high dose, and it mimicked Aya. I really honestly think all this information and intelligence moves with this time, with this wisdom coming out on all of this is just so profound. This wouldn't have existed 15 years ago to have a conversation like that and to have access.
Totally.
Right? But now we do. Just think about how much the growth, how much it's just extraordinary.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Spring. Really appreciate it. And really looking forward
Oh,
to
so
sharing your
good.
wisdom with a much larger audience.
Oh, so good to be back with you and to see how 10 years have evolved. A lot has happened in
Wild.
nothing. Still the same conversations on liberation.
That's right. Thank you so much because I know you're really busy. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please consider subscribing to Sahaja Soma on YouTube, rating the Redesigning the Dharma podcast on Apple or Spotify, or sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Any and every little bit helps. Also, please bear in mind that the plants and compounds mentioned on this podcast and on the Sahaja Soma platform are illegal in many countries, and even possession can carry severe criminal penalties. None of this represents medical advice or advocacy and should be construed as a recommendation to use psychedelics. There are serious legal, psychological, and physical risks. Psychedelics are not for everyone. They can exacerbate certain emotional problems, and there have been, in very rare cases, fatalities. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next episode or elsewhere on the Sahaja Soma platform.